Well, welcome to another exciting episode of this dang car. Today we have a 99 Ford Explorer 4-wheel drive with a 4-liter V6, and it needs upper and lower ball joints. We'll start off. Tools you're going to need. I've lined them all up. I'll read them off from right to left. I found a long breaker bar, 1/2-inch drive, a long crowbar, 2 ball joint forks. Up above we have a C-clamp. Then we have a pair of needle nose pliers, flat tip screwdriver, a bunch of assorted wrenches and sockets. We have a torque wrench with an axle socket, axle nut socket. Down below we have a bungee cord, so that way when the time comes you can hang the axle up out of the way. And 2 hammers. One beastly hammer to pound the ball joint out, and the other for anything else you might need it for. And then, last but not least, it makes the job a hell of a lot easier. You can make one yourself out of a few pieces of hollow pipe and a clamp, or you can go ahead and pick up yourself a ball joint press tool. They're about $39 at Harbor Freight or whatever your automotive hardware store is. They do make the job a lot easier. Alright, well, first thing you got to do, you got to get the truck up on jack stands. I've already done so, and I've taken the wheel off, and here we go. First thing I'm going to take off is front calipers. Everything non-essential to get to the ball joints, and leave it out of the way. Taking off the rotor first make things a lot easier, because the rotor weighs a ton and you're going to have to maneuver the steering knuckle around. So once you get the caliper off, take off the caliper basket. There's 2 15mm bolts on the inside to hold it on. Alright, well, obviously this is the average Joe garage. I don't have any of those fancy air tools, so if you don't have them, then this is the video. Alright, before you go ahead and separate any of the ball joints, I suggest taking the axle out of the steering knuckle. So that's why I have the crowbar, and I told you to keep on 3 of the lug nuts so you can lock it so it doesn't spin back and forth. So now it may not come out. Actually, it more than likely won't come out until you separate them and you can pull it out of the way. And that's what this here is. So I can set the whole steering knuckle out of the way with a 15/16 castle nut. And we have to drive this one apart. It's free, and as the lower. What I'm going to do here is try to force the axle back through. Never pound on anything with the threads exposed, so we'll put the retaining nut back on the front of it before we give it a whack. I like to put the nut right back on it to protect the threads. We'll suspend this on the wood. we'll use that bungee cord to hold the axle up out of the way. Now, the lower ball joints have a clip on them, a circle clip, and I have a tool to do that, but it's not strong enough. These are pretty beastly, so I'm going to use a needle nose pliers and try to pry it off. The new lower ball joints came with a fresh clip. I'll put a rag over it in case it decides to fly. It's always a good idea to wear safety glasses for something like this. And that is it. Now, the fun part. The ball joints are pressed in, so that means they have to be pressed out. Unless you feel like using the tool, I find it easier to use a sledge. And after a while it'll go into the recess and you'll need something you can use in front of it. I just use an axle socket. This is the passenger side. I chose this side for a reason. The driver's side is a little bit simpler. On the passenger side, there's an adjustment shackle for front end alignment, and it kind of looks scary when you get the wheel off and you see that and say, wow, that's a lot of nuts and bolts. It's real simple. The one up in the back, it moves in and out, so you can slide the whole assembly back and forth in the slider grooves. We're not going to touch that back bolt. We're just going to take the two 13/16 to take those off and put them right back on in the same place it came off. And here we have the new one. These ran about $78 a piece, local parts store. And if you're wondering why they came with grease fittings and I haven't put them in, hopefully you didn't sit up the night before and look at all your fancy new parts and say, oh, well, at least I get the grease fittings in. No, I left them out for a reason. That way when I bang around all these parts trying to fit them in, I didn't want to take the chance of knocking the fitting off. One of the plates will have a bigger hole in it. That's for the stud on the bottom of the joint. Set the clamp in place. Get the top on. Snug it up. I hear the bat phone going off. 7/8 to go on top of that, and I'm going to use the breaker bar. This does require quite a bit of force. Alright, now that we got the joint back in, it's time to put the clip back on. Now that we get this back on here, the clip is ready to go. We're ready to start putting some things back together now. And it can be kind of tricky to line it up to get the splines in there. Now that I've got the axle lined up and the splines started, I've got it hooked on the lower ball joint, and we're going to send it back in. Make sure the axle comes forward. We'll put the nut back on. Should be enough to pull through. Now we can put the castle nut on the lower ball joint. Alright, now we got the lower ball joint tightened up. We got the upper put in. We're going to go ahead and install the cotter pin. Now it's time to tighten the axle nut back up. The Shelton book says 157 to 213 pounds. Well, as for ball joints, that's about all there is to it on this truck. For the sake of time length on the 10-minute limit YouTube gives me, you'll be able to put the brake caliper and everything back on. If you have any question there, I have another video out of brake replacement. So that's it for now.